Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another BVI Finance Breakfast Forum. I am Elise Donovan for BVI Finance. Today, we continue part 2 in our series of Embracing the Crypto Revolution, positioning the BVI as a global hub for virtual assets. And pleased to have with us today, Kishelle Blaze Cameron. She's the regulator at the BVI Financial Services Commission, and Ms. Ayanna Hull, and from Harney's, she's a head of private clients. I'm going to give you their bios shortly, but before we get into that, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping. Again, we will have a Q&A session with the panelists, and we're going to discuss how the BVI can position itself from a regulatory perspective, what trends they're seeing in the virtual asset space since we've had a virtual asset service providers legislation. Both Kishelle has been dealing with the plethora of applications that we've received, the commission has received, and I know Harney's through Ayanna and her colleagues have put in a number of those applications and can speak to that perspective. So we are very pleased to have both of these experts joining us for this special breakfast forum, looking at embracing the crypto revolution. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so you can please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we address them after we speak with the panelists. Right now, I'm just going to go into the bios of our panelists. Ms. Kishelle Blaze Cameron, she's currently the Deputy Director of the Specialized Supervision Unit at the Financial Services Commission, where she is responsible for overseeing licensees that present the greatest level of risk or systemic importance in the jurisdiction. This includes all banks, systemically important trust and insurance companies, and all high-risk virtual asset service providers. At the FSC, she also acts as chair of the Commission's FinTech Working Group and deputy chair of the Commission's Risk Monitoring Committee. Kishelle is also the deputy chair of the BVI's Health Services Authority Board. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics, a master's degree in corporate finance, and several professional certifications in corporate governance and risk management. Ms. Ayanna Hull is head of the BVI Private Client Wealth and Regulatory Practice Groups at Harney's. She has over 15 years of experience practicing BVI commercial law. When her regulatory hat is not on, her clients include banks, corporate service providers, insurance companies, funds, and fund managers, advising them on restructurings and the impact of BVI regulatory legislation on their investment vehicles. As a member of the BVI's FinTech group, of the firm's FinTech group, she regularly oversees a variety of digital asset-related inquiries and advises on the impact of BVI regulatory legislation on virtual asset service provider services being structured through BVI companies together with the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing risk attendant to BVI structures involved in this digital space. She also acted as an in-house counsel to the BVI Financial Services Commission and its regulatory divisions. Ayanna is the current chairperson of the BVI Financial Services Commission Securities Investment Business Act Advisory Committee, as well as a member of the BVI Financial Services Commission's FinTech Advisory Committee. She is the immediate past chair of the National PACS Trust and a past chairman of the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. Please welcome Ayanna and Kishelle. Thank you both for joining us for today's session.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction, Elise, and thank you to BVI Finance for the invitation and for having us here to speak on this very relevant topic.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Elise and BVI Finance for having me. Happy to be here. I will have some challenges today because my orthodontist and I are fighting about my retainers. So if my speech is a little slurred, please forgive me. But happy to be here and to share what we have done over the last year or two in the industry.
You're perfectly fine. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our questions. And Kishal, this is going to be to you first. Virtual asset business is very popular, but it's high risk. The FSC has received 70 plus applications, quite a number, since the virtual asset service provider legislation went live. How does the regulatory framework for VASP ensure robust regulation without stifling innovation?
Thank you for that question, Elise. I will say that I think this has been a regulatory dilemma, a regulatory conundrum for quite some time. That responsibility to manage and allow for innovation, market growth, while having that happen within the confines of robust regulation. Specifically, I think within the sector, this sector, the virtual asset service provider sector, that has been especially, a conundrum that we've been facing. For us at the Commission, I think we've attempted to handle that issue or to manage that issue through two ways. The first would be communication. Before we enacted this law, similar to our modus operandi with other legislations, before we enacted this legislation and before we make any amendments, we always consult with our stakeholders. One of our primary stakeholders when we are looking at new legislations or amended legislations would be the persons on this call, the industry would include the industry. And that is something that we paid keen attention to when we were developing this legislation, this piece of legislation. So we undertook public consultation. We also consulted with our virtual asset advisory committee, which is very typical of the commission. We have advisory committees, which are normally constituted with a cross-section of persons from the industry, representing various technical experts that are able to share and consult and provide some guidance regarding the developments of the legislation. So we consult, we share, we collaborate with the industry because we consider and we always want to consider the impact of any possible legislation on market participants, their businesses, their business models. In addition to that, we are a risk-based regulator, and you'd see that being reflected in the financial services offerings that emanate out of BVI. Specifically, when we consider the VASP Act, you would note that within the Act, there is an element of a risk-based approach to the products that are allowed to be undertaken according to that Act. So those offerings that we deem to be higher risk, specifically within this Act, that would be the custodians and the exchanges. What we have done is we have required of those service providers we require them to satisfy additional more stringent regulatory obligations than those product offerings that we deem to be a little bit lower risk. So we are in a virtual asset space and we don't call anything low risk here, but there is levels of risk within the offerings that are available. And those things that we deem to be higher risk, we require additional or more stringent regulatory obligations. And then similarly, if there is a product that we deem to have a little less risk, we don't subject that to that. We don't subject those offerings to the same level of regulatory scrutiny. So this is this has been designed within this is a part of the way that the law has been designed, as well as you see this when you interact with us from a supervisory perspective, and the way you're required to report to the commission the things that you're required to satisfy. So we take a risk-based approach so that we ensure that there's some differentiation, and those things that don't need the additional layers, we remove it from the regulatory requirements. Our goal is to not be burdensome. We want to encourage the business. We just want to ensure that it's done safely from within the BVI.
From both of your perspective, what are the most significant emergent trends in the virtual asset space? What are you seeing from the regulatory side as well as from the business side? What are you both seeing?
Okay, I can go first, if that's okay, or Ayana?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I was asking if you wanted me to go first.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Whichever.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess I would say that from the industry side, we are seeing a lot of, well, I think countries in particular who are gearing up for tokenization. I think last year or the year before, we saw that El Salvador was one of the first countries to introduce crypto as its official currency. But we're seeing a lot of money redesign, a lot of tokenization, fiat currencies going into tokenizations. We're seeing more clarity, I think, in the industry, more understanding. One of the big issues that we all struggle with on either side is the compliance. We had a lot of clients in the beginning saying to us, we cannot compete because your KYC procedures are too stringent in the BVI. You can't onboard us unless we have this and that, and we're not, because of the retail consumer situation, we can't compete. I think those days are now long gone. We are seeing a lot of platforms and exchanges and even ICOs are complying with KYC and CDD requirements. So those are trends that we're seeing emerging as the industry is starting to settle down. And from an operational side, I think we're seeing layer 2 protocols, which are protocols that are built on top of underlying blockchains that are connecting with layer 1, which are the new blockchains, and they are interacting without the need to have underlying transaction detail from each other. So I think the industry is settling down a little bit. I was supposed to go to Ethereum and Bitcoin this morning, but I didn't have the time to see where they are. The crypto winters come in and they go out. But I think one of the other questions, which I will probably get into now, is that I think this new wave is here to stay. And amongst the jostling for position between centralized and decentralized finance, it's starting to cement itself as something for the future. And the trends that we are seeing can be summarized under a settling of the market and persons basically trying to understand more and being more compliant with international regulations and the requirements. That's what I'm seeing on the industry side. But the big thing is more comfort with compliance.
So I'll jump right in because I'm happy that you said that, Ayana, because I think I also, we've also been seeing this on our end, on the regulatory side. In our although we enacted the law last year and we've just received the applications as of last year, we've been for quite some time engaging with market participants, even before the law was enacted in 2023. And when we compare our experience in those discussions 2 years ago to now, what we see happening is a use or a better adoption of the technology, and automation of systems that allow for better compliance with regulatory expectations. And that's a trend as a regulator that makes us, brings us comfort in the process, because it's saying to us that the industry is understanding and conforming and preparing themselves to comply with regulatory expectations. So we've definitely seen that shift on our end. We've seen persons being able to demonstrate that their systems are appropriate, that the automation is safe, and it allows for proper risk mitigation controls within their business operations.
Okay, that's good in terms of the trends that you're seeing both from the regulatory side, the business side, and you said, Ayanna, that clients are willing to comply.
Yes.
And you're seeing them adopting automation in terms of the technology. Is the commission in the position technologically advanced to receive the applications, and what are the key challenges in regulating virtual assets, and how do you balance these with the overall desire to create a new growth area? Because we are seeing this as a new opportunity, a new growth area for the BVI. But are you able to respond to that? You have 70 plus applications. How are you responding? How are you balancing the need for us to have this new growth area, but at the same time, making sure that your robust regulatory regime is working?
That's all you, Kishel.
That's a interesting question, Elise. Well, I'll start off by saying, whether we're, it's here. The act is here. The act is enacted. It's something that we have been preparing for over the years, through by acquiring different types of resources and capacity. The technological capacities internally to be, to ensure that we're able to supervise the entities, as well as the capacity through resources, human resources, to ensure that, there are persons that are prepared to manage the space. It is a challenging sector to supervise. When we consider the challenges of the sector, one of the things that first comes to mind is the fluidity of the sector. So a lot of the models, and as regulators, we like models, right? Models allow us to prepare and be proactive for risk and things as before they come. So as a regulator, the models and a lot of the preparation that we would have done 2 years ago, because the industry is so fluid, a lot of it, it changes so often that things that would have been relevant 2 years ago is no longer relevant today. That's a challenge. That's a challenge, and that requires us in this sector to be a little bit more agile, to ensure that there is some flexibility with how we administer our supervisory regime and the scope of the legislation. It requires us to be adaptive and to have systems available to adapt to changes, because they're coming quick and fast. And then on top of that, the industry generally, the sector is a very complex one. And that goes back to my earlier comment in terms of ensuring that we have the proper resources and capacity internally to be able to properly supervise this space. And so, in short, Elise, we have been preparing. We understand the needs of the industry. We understand the need for us to be adaptable and agile, and to have those appropriate technological interfaces to ensure that's efficiency and proper oversight in this space.
Well, Ayanna, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think it's mostly a regulatory question, in terms of whether the FSC is prepared. I really don't know. I don't know the framework. I've had some experience with the capacity. And I think based on what the industry is seeing, there is some need for some more, I guess, bodies or capacity there in terms of the turnaround time to meet the FSC service standards. But I do believe that all the jurisdictions in the world, especially in the offshore space, are fixing themselves now. I don't believe that anyone is quite there yet. The BVI has a very good opportunity here in that our main competitor has always been the Cayman Islands in terms of the fund structure or the holding company structure. We know that Cayman has gotten ahead of the BVI in terms of funds because of the institutional investors' comfort level there, and they've never really turned away from that. We know that the BVI leads in terms of structuring transactions and holding companies. I believe that there's still an open market in the offshore sector for who can lead in the virtual asset space. And right now, the BVI is very well positioned to do that. We work a lot with our Cayman colleagues with the digital asset space, and from the clients that we receive, a lot of them prefer the BVI simply because our legislation looks friendly to them. We've had the applications in, we had the grandfathering provisions, transitioning period. And I think by comparison, Cayman, we rely on the Cayman side a lot for their foundation structures. So what we find is a lot of persons will come to the BVI if they're setting up their ICOs. The BVI company will be the main event, and then we will have a Cayman foundation that's structured on top of that. But most of the clients are coming to the BVI because the BVI has received them. We had guidance out early, so you were able to operate under that virtual guidance, the virtual asset service providers guidance, and then we put the legislation in place. They've made the applications to be able to operate. And at the same time, I think the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority was a bit slow in, I think I understand their turnaround time is 6 to 8 months now, but they were a bit slow in the beginning and basically criticized, I think, by clients as not having the appetite for digital assets. I don't think that the BVI responded in that same way. And then one of the advantages of the BVI legislation in terms of capacity and infrastructure is that the vast excluded public issuances, and the act also excluded initial coin offerings, which are ICOs, from being covered. And a lot of our clients receive that. And that's the reason why there's all of this attention and attraction to being registered in the BVI. The other thing is that we came out with guidance notes and regulations at the same time. And I think some of our competitors are not there. So from the industry perspective, in terms of having the framework, I believe that the BVI has it. I think that in terms of the offshore sectors, we are ahead of the game with it. I believe all we need to do now is turn around those applications and get some approvals so that our clients could be happy and we can continue to attract them to coming to the BVI.
Kishal, that puts me, I was
Sorry,
going to ask the same question that Ayana talked about, the comparison with other jurisdictions. I'm going to come back to the point about the approval of the applications, because I know that's what everybody on this call, on this webinar is waiting to hear from you. What's the status of their applications? But before we get to that, I'm sure you've done quite a bit of looking or reviewing other jurisdictions in terms of their regulatory approaches to virtual assets. And what have you seen?
So for us, that as you pointed out, Elise, that's a part of our process, looking at other jurisdictions to see, and compare, and also sometimes to take notes from the models that they've established. I will say as well, on the regulatory side, we work alongside a lot of those jurisdictions. We are part of working groups, working committees together, because we realize that a lot of the industries, for a lot of the issues, for example, that are in BVI, maybe in Cayman, maybe in other regulators across the world. When we look at other countries, a lot of what has taken place in those countries and those jurisdictions has been driven in part by international standard setting expectation and requirements. Specifically, one such requirements would be the recommendations, the FATF recommendations. And this has led to some countries prohibiting outright the activity. Some other countries creating regulatory models that either allow for compliance with their their AML CFT regimes, or models that allow for that bring in requirements for both AML CFT as well as prudential requirements. On our end, we chose to we chose to develop a regime that considers requirements for the AML CFT as well as those prudential requirements, because we wanted to ensure that on the onset there's a very clear, a very concise piece of regulatory legislation that spoke to our commitments to supervise this sector within BVI. I don't want to comment on any specific jurisdiction's approach, but there has been varying approaches within the region, within I think worldwide, which reflects the expectations of those international standard setting bodies. But we do consider other person's approaches, and we have considered those approaches when we developed our specific regime. And again, a lot of those approaches have been driven by those expectations. I don't know if I responded to all of the question, Elise, or was there a second part?
Yes, that was fine. I started talking and didn't realize that my mic was still muted. We're still having camera difficulties, so sorry. I guess I'll have to be off camera for the rest of this webinar, unfortunately. But we wanted to ask about the importance of international cooperation in regulating VASP. What steps are being taken in this direction?
Okay.
I
mean,
I can.
I think it's an FSC. I mean, it's FATF, right? But I think you can go ahead, and then I can just fill in at the end if there's anything, because it's more regulatory focused on that one.
I mean, so I guess this picks up where I would have just left off.
Yeah.
Also, international cooperation, for us, it's very important. We have to collaborate. All of these businesses, I would say, most of the sector operates in multiple jurisdictions, cross jurisdictions, and it's important for us to collaborate, so that we're able to share information with our co-regulators and supervising the space. Within this application process specifically, I will say that where we see footprints of any applicant in any jurisdiction outside of BVI, we engage those regulators. We disclose, we share the activities that we see that are happening with our BVI companies in their jurisdiction, because we do want to ensure that there's compliance not only with BVI laws, but also with the laws of the jurisdictions that all entities operate in. But outside of that, collaboration, cooperation, it's ingrained in how we as regulators go about doing our business. The goal is to reduce the ability for bad actors to commit nefarious activity cross borders, and our MOUs and our agreements with various regulators allows us to do this. So for us, collaboration with our foreign stakeholders, it's very important. It's a critical part of how we go about supervising this industry.
Yes,
Uh,
it's critically important. So, Ayana, but how do you manage the risk associated with virtual asset transactions, particularly in relation to fraud and nefarious activities that Kishal just mentioned? Because this is a high risk business.
yeah.
Let's face it, and you dealing with a number of clients from all over the world in different arenas of digital assets. But how do you manage the risk? How do you uh, ensure that you're not getting into a business that is involved in nefarious activity?
So what I can say is, from an industry standpoint, we still rely on the FATF recommendations. The FATF recommendations are very important. It remains the FATF remains the global standard setting body for anti-money laundering, countering terrorist financing, and countering terrorist financing, proliferation financing, and even though the FATF is not a regulatory body, what it does is that it provides the framework for countries to adapt. Now, for us, we've always been reliant on those recommendations and the guidance, even from the mutual funds legislation and SEBA, because it's all financial services. I think all the 2019 and the 2021 update did was brought vast and new technologies within that scope, and indicated that countries and regulatory authorities ought to pay attention to, because I think we remember when digital assets came into play, it was supposed to be a move away from centralization. It was supposed to be everything became anonymous and persons didn't have to provide anything to do business. And then the FATF said, wait a minute, this is not going to work, because this is the way that persons can also launder money, finance terrorism, and proliferation. So then rules came into play to deal with that. So that's all we're dealing with. I don't think it's any different risk to what we had to deal with starting out with funds and managers, especially Forex. Is one of the reasons that the FSC has high capitalization requirements for some of these types of businesses. The legacy business, get through okay, the approved managers, the funds, but we still have some issues with foreign exchange trading, where the capitalization requirement, Kishel, I think is still up to $1 million. And we're seeing some of that spill over into VAS. So that's the framework. And the FATF for me is our Bible. I'm not a compliance officer, but a lot of what we have to do in advising our clients every day is compliance. So a big part of any structure, whether you're a law firm, whether you're the FSC, whether you're the industry, whether you're a corporate service provider, is compliance. I heard Peter Tan, I think, in a talk that we had, well, one-on-one, and he said to me, if I had to advise any young person coming out of law school today, I would advise them to be a regulatory lawyer or do compliance, because there's nothing happening in the world right now. The cost of compliance is significant, but you have to do it. So on the industry side, what we do is you have to have the risk-based approach. That's what the FATS suggested. You have a risk-based approach. You figure out, how does VASP affect your business in terms of the risk, and then you mitigate against that. So for us at Harney's, if I take you through a day of what we do, we get an application in, we get a request, we have the virtual asset classification tool. We send that out to our clients. We get them to answer questions so that they can let us know whether they think they're a VASP or not. This is just for VASP. And then we look at it, and if we decide that it was borderline, if it's clear out, not a VASP, then we go back to them with high level advice and we say, you're not conducting virtual asset service activity. If it is, then the next step for us is that we suggest that they get a legal opinion, because we interact with our fiduciary side, even though we're the legal side. And our fiduciary side is not going to incorporate a company for you to do virtual asset unless they get clearance from the legal side that this isn't breaching BVI law. So if you show up to Harney's Fiduciary, Harney's Corporate Services Limited, and say, I'm trading crypto and I need a company, they're going to say, you need to take legal advice. We can suggest Ayana and her team. We will then advise them. We will produce a legal opinion for them. A lot of our clients also want to list on Coinbase, and these trading platforms. So they get CoinList, they get these opinions from BVI, they take them to these platforms, they accept them, and they say, okay, you can conduct virtual asset activity under the jurisdiction where you are. So the first step for us is to get that opinion, to let them know whether they're in compliance with the legislation or not. They then go off to fiduciary, they get their company. Now, in addition to that, we also provide an anti-money laundering opinion for them to let them know what they have to comply with in terms of BVI law. And when they get to the fiduciary side will say to them, if we take this company on, this is what you have to do. And we are going to check this on an annual basis. If you need help with compliance, we have a compliance solution team. We can provide this for you, that for you. So at Harney's, we do not accept any type of this business unless we understand how it works and unless we are comfortable that they are going to comply with BVI legislation. Now, for the ICOs and other structures that fall outside the virtual asset service providers legislation, we also say to them that there is a general compliance for BVI companies to comply with the BVI AML regime. Although you may not be caught under the AML legislation or the AML code, you will still be caught under other legislation like the Proceeds of Criminal Conduct Act if you're caught laundering or any other nefarious activity. So we still recommend that all BVI companies, because of the level of risk involved, whether you fall under the VASPA or not, and whether you're caught by the AML code or not, because to be caught, you have to be doing relevant business. And to be doing relevant business, you have to be one of the companies or entities that are caught as a relevant person. So if you're not a VASP and you're not conducting any other relevant activity, you're not caught by the AML code or regs. We still say to our clients, you ought to consider, I guess, subscribing and adapting to that high level of standard anyway, because of the level of risk that's involved in the virtual asset space. And that's how we deal with it. We have the tools, we have an opinion, we then send them off to fiduciary. We have our compliance team monitor every year. And if you can't do it yourself, then we offer that tool and you pay a certain amount every year. But the travel rule is there. You have to share that information when you're moving from intermediary to intermediary in the VAS space. And the FATS has basically set out what needs to be done. The regulator is doing it. They've passed it on to us in the legislation, and the industry as a gatekeeper has to comply with that in order for the BVI to maintain its risk in terms of its reputation. Hope
Thank
that
you
helps.
very
And
much.
before,
Yes, but Kishel, Ayana made a statement which I want to question whether you're in agreement with that. She said the risks are no more than others, such as funds. But we've all heard about the stories associated and the companies that have really given some really high risk situations. Do you agree with that? Is this the risk proportional to any other business?
so what we say is that, virtual assets, it's a different type of asset class, but it is an asset class. The way we look at it is it's not different, it's no different from the way we go about supervising any other sector. It's just another asset class. And we try to convey that as well to market participants. The regulatory expectations are the same. In terms of the inherent risk, I think that the inherent risk varies somewhat. There are some characteristics that are attached to the virtual assets that make, and in some cases, elevate the inherent risk, especially inherent risk that's attached to the possibility for money laundering and to be used for other nefarious activities like terrorist financing, proliferation financing. We know that with these particular products, there is an ability to use them and to have the transactions be anonymous. We know that these specific products allow facilitate quick transfers of business, across the world, almost instantaneously. And so we do believe that the inherent risk varies, and the inherent risk can be elevated depending on the use of the asset. Our expectation is that entities that are using the products are able to identify their risk, and present to us proper risk management structures that mitigate those risks. So Ayana would have just mentioned, for example, compliance with the transfer rule, and compliance with the recommendations, the FATF recommendations. So I wanted to reiterate our regulatory expectation of those things, because within our industries we have a lot of corporate service providers, and Ayana would have just mentioned that you guys really are the gatekeepers, and you are the gatekeepers to our industry. And what that means is that when we have a VASP, that VASP would have come through one of you guys, one of the corporate service providers, or one of the the legal entities. And there is an obligation, one, to understand that the risk of that client, that underlying company, is your risk, and therefore the jurisdiction's risk. And we expect that you, as the corporate service provider, would understand and have as well appropriate risk mitigating strategies to manage your clients who may be the virtual asset service providers. I also wanted to pivot back to the point of the compliance with our AML CFT regime. So whilst the VASP Act was enacted last year, it's important to note that virtual assets were deemed relevant business as of December 2022. And we therefore expect that persons would have been in compliance. So your compliance systems would have been appropriate as of that date, not as of the date when the VASP Act was passed. And so with these applications, one of the things that we are scrutinizing heavily is whether persons are able to demonstrate that they have been complying with those things. For example, the travel rule.
Elise,
Okay.
I just wanted to say something else, not going against Kishel, but of course Kishel is a regulator and I am industry, right? And the reason I say that the risks, I understand the quickness, I guess the alacrity with which these transactions can happen. It makes the risk even more, you need to pay more attention. The reason we say it's the same is because you will always have bad actors. You had funds. I mean, we remember I think it was, when was it, 2007, when the entire housing market crashed. We had so many issues that happened with funds and Ponzi schemes. We've had all of this happen before. I think what's happening with us is we had the Madoff. I sat in a Maples conference room waiting on a client call with Madoff, the situation, when we were told that we were no longer going to have to call because our client had just committed suicide. I was a part of that transaction. We've seen this before. So when I say that the risks are the same, the risks are new. So they are known. So they present more anxiety for us. But I believe just like Web 2, which was the internet at the time that was coming out, no one knew where that would go. There were a lot of complications. There were a lot of issues. There were a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty. Now today, the internet is just a normal part of our lives. We have the blockchain now, which is Web 3. We are going through that process, those teething pains, and the FSC as a regulator has a right to be cautious. But I think in 10 or 15 years, we will sit down and we will be, well, maybe 2025, we will be, I won't be here, we will be dealing with the next thing And this would be a conversation that we would be having like we were like the internet, because it's here to stay. The problems will be worked out. The risk will be managed. The FATF will continue to guide in terms of what they're seeing. The regulators will continue to push us to do better, and we will comply. So that's the only reason I'm saying it's more of the same. It's new. We don't quite understand it yet. We can turn our heads around funds managers, approved managers. We can do that. We know how the internet works now. We've put cybersecurity stuff in there. We will get there with the blockchain. And that's the only reason I'm saying, you know, you just need to do what you're doing all along with your funds and your managers. Pay attention, put your compliance in place, make sure you know your customers. It's just financial practice 101. And if we all do that, we will manage these risks and get through the difficulties. And when we send applications into the FSC, we will get them back in 6 to 8 weeks like we do now with legacy business. I'm looking
I
forward to
must say,
that day.
I think both of you are saying the same thing.
Yes, I was just
you're
going to say, I agreed. I was
Yes.
agreeing, yes.
Yes, good.
Yes, it's new, so therefore there's an inherent elevated risk.
Yeah.
But it is high risk nonetheless for the time being.
For the time
It
being,
may
yes.
not be, it may not be in the future, but for right now it is.
Yeah.
So I think, Kishella, I'm going to ask the burning question. Is it the elevated inherent risk that is keeping you from approving some of these applications more readily? I'm trying to say that as diplomatically, because I know what the industry is asking.
So, the products are complex. I think if persons are anticipated being approved, authorized, registered, licensed within a few weeks after submission, that might have been a misunderstanding of the process. Or regulatory assessments generally are in-depth assessments, and more so with these business models because they are complex, because they're novel, because they're new. And there's also it also involves an element, a big part of it is the cross-border collaboration. And so before we make any decisions on any of these business models, we are going to collaborate. We are going to talk to our fellow regulators, whether they be in Canada, in Asia. We speak to them and we have to ensure that generally the entities that are before us are viable, they're in compliance, not only with laws in BVI, but laws in other jurisdictions where they may have footprints. And then in addition to that, as you would have pointed out, Elise, there is a lot of inherent risk, and we have to be sure that we're making good decisions. The decisions that we make now, the decisions that we make tomorrow, we are going to have to, live with those decisions 1 and 5 years from now. And we want to ensure that the environment that we create, the space, the sector is populated with good, viable providers. And that requires quality reviews from the commission. And that is something that we cannot compromise on. That is something that we will continue to undertake. We have to be sure about the entities that we are issuing licenses to in BVI. We are encouraging the business. We want to ensure that it's safe business. And to do that, we have to undertake quality assessments, and we have to ensure that we are collaborating cross-border with fellow regulators who may have some, where our companies may also have some footprint. So it's a number of things. It's the complex business, it's the riskiness of the business, it's the cross-jurisdictional nature of the business, and it's also that consideration that it is a sector where there's been a lot of volatility, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and any fallout from this sector is not ring fenced to this sector. You know, it impacts our entire financial services offerings. So we will be efficient. Currently, I think we are at around 75% uh, in terms of the initial assessments, in terms of all that were submitted at the end of that transitional period. But with the efficiency, we still have to ensure that we maintain good quality sound assessments, to protect the sector for the persons, for all of the persons that are here today, for our market participants.
That is all fair. It's complex, it's new, it's cross-border, and you have to undertake quality assessments to ensure that we have a viable and quality business in the jurisdiction going forward. You're not compromising on that. And that's all fair.
Elise,
Ayana.
sorry, Elise,
Ayana.
before you move on, can I just add, also, I wanted to point out that though our legislation, when it was enacted, there would have been a number of participants. And in fact, the majority of our applications are from persons who would have been in this space before the law was enacted. And those persons are able to continue doing business. So we have not, we have not stopped business. Business has continued. And the majority of those persons who have submitted applications to date are persons that continue to conduct business because they were a part of that grandfathering clause that was attached to the enactment of that act. I just wanted to add that, so that persons understand that we are not restricting business right now. We have not attempted to put up any major hurdles to persons carrying on business. We're just undertaking the assessments of the businesses as they exist.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ayana, that said, we're going to get into answering some of the questions from our audience, but what, taking all that Kishel has said into consideration, are you at risk of losing clients who have applications in for new business? They're not ones who have been grandfathered in.
You said not the ones that have been grandfathered in?
Yes, the new ones, the new applications that cannot start business without the license.
I think it's a good question. I think industry-wide, the answer must be yes. It would be foolish of us to think that persons are just going to sit there. We haven't been able to, the deadline was July 2023. The grandfathering period was 6 months. And while Kishel is correct that persons can continue to do business, I think the legislation says until they get a decision from the FSC that's in the negative, then they continue to do business. So it's not interrupted. However, persons are looking for certainty, and there are persons who want to put in an application, but they're looking to see what the results of the applications that are currently submitted look like before they choose the BVI as a jurisdiction, for example. So we have heard a lot of noise. We have heard some industry partners and competitors say that they have lost applicants or potential applicants because we have not been able to say that we have one person that has received an approval under the VASPA. So yes, that's there. From where I sit though, personally, our and I'm looking around at my team because they're all sitting straight across from me. Our clients have not given us any hassle at all with the application process. They all seem to be churning out the information that they were asked. We have one that is very, very advanced, but we thought it was a very good application. And so, yes, I've heard it. We had a meeting the other day where there's moves afoot to create a sort of a virtual asset association like the Investment Funds Association, because there is concern in the industry. And we ought to be careful of that we don't lose the I guess what do I say, the mileage that we have and the position that we have in terms of person gravitating to the BVI. So it would be good if the FSC could let us know whether, in the next 2 or 3 months, they expect to be able to say something by the end of first quarter with some of these applicants in terms of the affirmative, so that we can then manage our clients' expectations in terms of when we are likely to get an answer from them. I know that the first rounds have gone out. We were told that none of the first rounds would be responding to until you get everything out. I just heard you say that you're 75% now there, but clients are watching. They are looking to see if we are effective and efficient. And while we understand the risks that are there is a service standard that everyone would expect. And we are what, 7 months in now? The end of January will make what are we, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. We're about 7 months in. So it would be good if we can get some understanding from the FSC as to where they are in their assessment with some of these applications, what percentage they think look great, what percentage they think were borderline, what percentage are just rubbish, and let us know when they think, so that we can go back and say to our clients, look, we're nearly there. We expect some answers in 2 to 3 months, and then that will get us to get the new applications comfortable. Having said that, one of the things I also said in the meeting that I was in a week or so ago is that all the jurisdictions are grappling with the same issues like the BVI. So there's not a plethora of places that you can run to at this point that would have a high level of compliance. You can go to other jurisdictions that may not be implementing FATF standards, but that's going to run out. So I think the playing field is being leveled, and there are not a lot of options in terms of having a good, clean, compliant, well-regulated structure. And that's what a lot of our clients are looking for. That's the reason they come to the BVI. When they come to us, they said, look, we are not trying to avoid compliance. We are not trying to avoid KYC. We want to be regulated so that we can do what we need to do and be comfortable with it. So we don't want to chase them away. We don't want to have our competitors pick up steam and then leave us in the lurch. So it's a difficult question to answer, because I haven't experienced none of my customers saying, look, we are running away from the BVI, but I know other persons have. So it would be good if the FSC can let us know that and put a proper service standard on it after the first batch, so that persons can know. And this is the same thing we went through with SEBA. And this is the same thing we went through with managers. It took some time. The letters that came out of the FSC when we sent in our first SEBA manager were like 7, 8 pages. It's the same thing that we're seeing, those of us who have been here since Adam was a little boy. And then as the FSC got comfortable with the product, in the next year or two, the letters got shorter. The request got to 2 or 3 pages. So I think it's teething pains, but we still have to manage our clients' expectations so that we don't lose the force that we have in the market at this point.
Michelle, that's a lot. Do you want to respond to that, or should we just go on to the other questions from the audience? Because she's asking, I'm not sure that you're in a position to answer those questions. What percentage are you seeing that's looks viable? What percentage is rubbish? Do you want to answer that question?
So I'm not in a position to give specific numbers, but I will say, a part of Ayana's question was, what are our expectations in terms of licensing anybody, I guess, persons, anytime soon. I will say that there were a number of applications that we consider to be quality, sound applications. And, we do foresee that there will be some activity, some move towards this shortly. I won't put a specific timeline on it, but we do see, we do anticipate to move towards authorizations of the persons that have demonstrated that they are able to properly adequately conform with the regulatory expectations, in terms of having all their systems, etc., in place. I will say also that, our responses, our approvals, they're not just based on the time that from the time when persons submit their applications. A lot of the responses that have gone out, they're very detailed, they're very long, letters, because there has been, a lot of information that we would have liked to have had that we did not have in terms of our overall assessments. And this is a part of what, this goes into outcomes in terms of time it takes to approve things if there is a decision to approve. And so, persons would have to consider, the responses that they've received. How do they best provide us with the information that we need to make those holistic assessments? But we do have some really good applicants, and we do anticipate moving towards authorizing persons shortly under this act. But again, the assessments or responses would guide or should guide, your expectations in terms of your particular applications and when they will be licensed. I will say as well, we are making a big effort to ensure that we are not placing any additional regulatory burdens on particular vehicles. And we're doing that by being more direct, more engaging with those, having that direct engagement with entities. We've been meeting with the underlying applicants themselves because we want to understand their business models. We want to ensure that the questions that we are asking are appropriate questions for what's in front of us. And we are giving persons every opportunity to demonstrate to the commission that the vehicle and the model that they are presenting is something that is viable, suitable, and within the risk tolerance of the commission.
I think that's an excellent answer. So we'll move on. Thank you very much for that.
Elise, I just have one question for
Yeah.
Kishel. I don't want to put her on the spot, but she did say that some of these approvals will come shortly. Can she define shortly? Yes.
I was going to
with
do
my
it, but
industry hat on.
I'm not going to do that. Because I think if she had a definition for shortly, she would have said it, right, Michelle?
A lot of that shortly depends on the response time. So there's also, there's a response time from us to applicants, but there's also the response time from applicants back to the commission. And a lot of those applications that are significantly progressed, we can make decisions on them only if we receive responses back that respond in majority to the issues we would have raised.
Okay. I rest there.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the questions that we have from our attendees. As the regulator takes steps to ensure its capacity building, this would involve training opportunities on monitoring and assessing VASP and digital space. Does or has the Commission exposed its staff to training by companies such as XREG? Does the FSC offer focused VASP training to only the team in the specialized unit? Or is it building its capacity by opening such opportunities to all interested staff? This question helps us as the industry to understand how equipped our regulatory personnel are in this volatile space, and are they keeping abreast with the emerging trends? Kishal?
It's an interesting question. It's a very focused question in terms of who we train. The commission has, prioritized training of persons in the commission in this space for several years. We are able and we access training through various mechanisms, a number of training authorities, a number of other regulatory authorities. And I will say that the team that is dealing that deals with VASP, there is a priority for that team to have continuous capacity, building resources dedicated to that team, because they are at the forefront. However, I will say as well, my first statement was that, we have been undertaking training for years. And so that means training would have been initiated even before the act was enacted, even before certain teams were formed. And, that training would have gone out and been available to a cross section of persons within the regulator. So in short, yes, we train. We train often. We train a number of persons, and we also prioritize training depending on the needs of the commission.
Okay, thank you. The VASP Act currently anticipates situations where the FSC may exercise its discretion to require a licensed entity to have a local director in the BVI. In what situations will this be necessary?
So this was a provision that we put in as a risk-based control, where we assess an entity to have specific types of risk or elevated risk for a particular reason. Having that local director in BVI gives us additional regulatory comfort in terms of having someone that's underground that we can speak to in short order if necessary. So we would require that if there's particular risk that we are trying to mitigate against, and we see the local director as something that would help to mitigate a particular risk.
Okay, so the next question follows from that. It's earlier you distinguished between high-risk VASP activities and those of a lower risk. Which VASP activity or activities would the Commission consider of a lower risk?
So my comments to that was in reflection of how we designed the VASP Act. And within the Act, you would note that we have identified custodians and exchanges as offerings, as service offerings that require additional regulatory provisions because we deem those activities to be higher risk because of what they do, because of their abilities to hold customer assets, because of their ability, to offer to different type of customers and, settlement issues, etc. Within the Act, there are additional categories that can be registered. For example, persons who may facilitate the offering of a virtual assets into the sector. There's a transfer of assets. There may be persons who facilitate exchanges but are not actual exchanges themselves. And so there's a number of activities that are not, there are a number of offerings that are not required to comply with those additional provisions. But within the Act, we have specified that exchanges and custodians must comply with additional sections. And this was done because, we need the additional information to supervise the risks that are inherent to those models.
The FSC VAS application guidance stated that the FSC would endeavor to provide initial comments on applications within 6 weeks, with the FSC's service standard requiring that applications be concluded within 6 months from submission. Will the FSC be revisiting its service standards in this respect?
It's something that we are considering. That guidance was issued with the consideration of normal business operations, normal business service standards. I think, what happened was that on August 1st or July, at the end of July, we received all of the applications at the same time, and that has impacted our ability to meet those service standards. But this is, the onset. This is the introduction of the law. We do not anticipate that our current environment is going to continue. This is, this is where we're at now because we're, going through the initial mobilizing of the act and assessment of applications that existed before the act came into play. It's not a normal circumstance. It's not a position that, is going to continue indefinitely. It's just a position that exists now as we introduce the law.
Okay. What is the process for making amendments to the application? Example, if there is a director change post your submission?
Just write us and tell us. The law requires that if there's any significant changes that have occurred, after you've submitted your application, you are obligated to tell us. And so, for example, if there's something like a director change, you have to tell us that. You have to submit the relevant documents and tell us, that there has been a change and the reasons why. But there is an obligation to provide us information if there are any changes that happen subsequent to the submission of an application.
Okay. Some applicants have received no feedback at all. I know you said you've been through 75%, and you're putting there saying, can you explain if this is based on perceived risks of the applicant, for example, low risk, and give an estimated date when everyone will have heard back by?
So it's a good question in terms of who has received responses. And yes, some of the applicants were more complex than others. Some of the applications were better than others. And some of who we have not responded to were applications when we did our cursory review, were applications that may have been more complex or not as materially complete as we would like. I'm not saying that all of them, are in that category, but we did in responding, we did respond to applicants that, from our cursory review, applications that were materially complete, applications that might have been less complex, and the complexities are not necessarily a reflection of what was submitted. The complexities generally are just, the operations, where they're doing business, who are their clients. So nothing that is of the fault of the company itself. It's just that we had to create some, groups in terms of how we go about responding to applications. I cannot provide a date regarding when we will complete the others, but we are endeavoring to get them out shortly, as soon as we can, as soon as we are able to respond. I will say that we generally we're a very open regulator in terms of discussing any issues or concerns that persons may have. And if you have a specific concern about something that you may have submitted, send me an email. And if we need to have some follow-up conversations, we will do that. But we are endeavoring to get those responses back. I know persons are anxious. I know Ayana would have made a point that persons are looking for regulatory clarity, and we understand that, and we are making every effort to get those responses out as soon as we can, without compromising the quality of the assessments and any of our regulatory processes that allow us to, understand the entirety of the thing that we may be approving.
Elise, I have a question for Kishel. I remember that the FSC was very clear, and I guess being a member of the focus group, that you were going to not be as tolerant as you did in 2010 with SEBA, when we rushed the applications in just to meet the deadline, and any application that was not material in its presentation, you would just send back and not accept. Uh, has the FSC done that? Are you at liberty to say, or do you think that is one of the reasons you have applications that you have put in a pile that you haven't responded to?
We have not, on the face of it, rejected any applications outright. Like I said previously, we are making every effort because we understand that it's a new sector. We understand that the market participants are not our typical market participants. And this industry has been born outside and before, regulatory frameworks and models, which is not typical. Normally you have a law and then the activity comes. This sector developed way before regulatory frameworks. And so we understand that it's different. And that's why we're treating it differently. And that's why we are making the efforts to have that direct engagements with the persons that are actually behind of the companies, versus just engagement with just engagement with the corporate service providers or the law firms. So we have not uh, outright refused anyone on that basis or sent back any applications, but we have said to persons, a lot of documents are missing, etc., and we need them to be able to begin that initial assessment.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
we
Kishel.
have approximately how many, I think you answered that before. Anyway, I'll ask the question. Approximately how many applications have been provided to conduct high-risk vast business, that is, to act as a custodian or an exchange?
I don't have those numbers offhand. It was a part of the data that we presented at our Meet the Regulator forum, but I don't have the data. I don't have the data, and I don't want to misquote. But I will say that the majority of the applications were uh, under our category of business that we call virtual asset service providers. But I cannot provide specific data in relation to the numbers of custodians versus exchanges at this time.
Okay. Kishel, you mentioned that the aim is to avoid placing any excessive regulatory burdens on applicants by liaising with them in order to understand the projects, etc. Does this mean that it is likely for applicants to be asked to make regulatory deposits as conditions for licensing?
We have not, that's not a part of our current regulatory framework for for this sector. In terms of financial resources, one, there is a onus to demonstrate, and this isn't just for VASP. This is for any person that's seeking authorization or licensing from the commission. As a part of all fit and proper assessment, you have to demonstrate that there is financial viability within the thing that you're seeking to be authorized. And then specifically to VASP, what we do expect to see are sufficient capital amounts that are commensurate with the nature, size, and complexity of the application. So if you're operating an exchange, if you're holding a custodian, we expect to see higher levels of capital, because in the event that there's some issue or you know, shortfall for some reason, this capital would allow for the continuation of services and obligations that you would have acquired in doing business. In addition to that, we also require persons seeking to be authorized and persons authorized to have professional indemnity insurance. Again, that insurance should be commensurate to the nature, size, and complexity of the applicant, and given the specific inherent risk, we expect to see professional indemnity insurance that captures certain types of risks. For example, loss of customer assets or issues in relation to data breaches, etc. So financial requirements, so encompass those two elements, the PI insurance and the capital amounts. We don't at this time require any separate regulatory deposit. I'm not saying that we will never require, but at this time we do not currently require that.
Okay. The next question, and then we're winding up. So if you have any additional questions, please put them in. It's relating to compliance. Are you able to disclose how many compliance officers, if any, have been approved to provide the role in the VAS space? The background to this question is based on the understanding that the FSC prefers compliance officers in the VAS space to focus explicitly in this area. Of course, it's a new and specialized and complex high-risk area, she says. So have you approved any compliance officers?
So approvals of compliance officers would be attached to the approval of a VASP. We approve, as a part of issuing a registration or a license, we approve the resources that you have. And as a part of those resources, you are required to have a compliance officer. The issue for us would be, for a compliance officer that's acting on behalf of several companies, the issue for us would be the ability to demonstrate that you have sufficient time and resources to dedicate to the entity. And this isn't something that's specifically for VASP. In general, if you are acting for multiple companies, or if you, are attempting to act for multiple companies, then you must demonstrate that you have sufficient time and resources to undertake the compliance function. What we have said is that with the VAP structures, that compliance function is, we anticipate that it's very involved, very onerous because of the nature of the activities. I'll add here as well, we have also said that corporate compliance vehicles are not appropriate for virtual assets service providers. Going back to the same reasons, it is an issue of resources, appropriate resources being available to undertake the compliance function given the vehicles that you're acting for.
Okay. Ayanna, do you have any final question for Keishel, since it's now a Keishel Q&A?
No, I don't. I'm good. I think I represented the industry's issues.
They've been well received.
Hopefully well. So yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, so I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to give your last comments before we wrap up.
Okay, well, let me go first and let the regulator end. I don't have much more to say except that, again, thank you for allowing, I guess, women to do part 2 of this series. I as head of BVI regulatory with that hat on, do a lot of this work. I don't think I'm an industry expert, as Elise said. I'm more an industry regulatory expert in the sense that I don't get into the nitty gritty of crypto like some of my Cayman colleagues do. I'm not a techie, but we have to pay attention to the trends and what's happening because we have to be able to have intelligent conversations with our clients. So to that extent, we're watching the space and we're always involved in what's happening on the wider front. So it's always good for us to have these dialogues, have these communications. I pick up the phone all the time to either Kishel or Glenford if I don't understand something or where we are. And I think as stakeholders and as gatekeepers in the industry, we do have an obligation to make sure that we uphold the compliance function of the industry. That's where we stress. And whatever we need to do in terms of our frameworks to make sure that we assist ourselves and then the FSC and wider the jurisdiction to make sure that the quality of the work that we send to them to approve is good, then we need to do that. I think that's what I would say from an industry perspective, and that we hope that we can get across this line within the next 2 or 3 months with the VASP applications so that we can get the country and the jurisdiction where, I mean, I think we're all waiting with bated breaths for the FATF value. I don't know what that will do to anything, but hopefully we can use an opportunity to show that we're forward thinking and that we're efficient in this space. And while we monitor the risks, we understand the business case to get these things moving. And then the industry and the FSC can have their normal, wonderful working relationship again. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Ayanna. I think you continue to have a wonderful working relationship. You just said pick up the phone and call Kishel and Glenford anytime you want. You can't get better than that.
Right.
Kishel, your final words?
I just want to, end where Ayana, I want to start where Ayana ended. I didn't realize that we didn't have, our current relationship with the industry, was not going well. We do understand that, there is some anxiety surrounding the outcome of the applications and how that impacts uh, business going forward. And we just want to reiterate that we are committed to supporting an environment that is inviting to this sector, to virtual asset service providers. But we do that with the caveat of also adding that you know, there is an obligation on us to ensure that persons are protected and that innovation cannot come at a cost to compromising compromising uh compromising the oversight and robustness that this sector requires. Um, we will endeavor as best as possible uh, to ensure that the regulatory framework that we place on these licensees are appropriate, commensurate, and again, we will continue to collaborate with the industry. We've collaborated quite extensively coming into this, and we intend to continue to utilize those mechanisms of collaboration so that we are sure that what we're putting out is the best product possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Kishel. And I am going to turn over to my colleague, Adriana Sovera, so that she can close out since we need a face on camera from BVI Finance. But I just wanted to say that I am immensely proud of these excellent and very expert professionals that we've been talking with today. I know Ayana says she's a regulatory professional, but she's an expert, and like I said, it's immense. We have the challenge of motorcycles passing by, so just giving that pause. But I am, as I was saying, immensely proud of both Ayan and Kishel for the level of and quality of the presentation that you've given today. I think this has been a very informative session, and I think all of us are really content with the information that we've been provided from both Ayan and Kishel. And I just wanted to reiterate and encapsulate some of what I heard today. This is a very complex area in terms of virtual assets. It's new, but it's also a strong area of opportunity for the jurisdiction. But we must ensure that whatever applications and whatever approvals we give, that it's viable and that it's suitable and that it meets the risk appetite of the BVI. And so with that, I want to thank, like I said, these very expert professionals. I'm really proud, and we're going to train up the next BVI landers like Kishel and Ayana. So we hope to see you wearing more of those hats as we move into getting more persons into this area, and I know the ministry is keen on that. So whatever opportunities that you could provide in terms of training and opening up the opportunities for young persons to come up in the industry like yourself, I am just encouraging you to make yourselves available. I know both of you are extremely busy, so you can also get your colleagues at Harney's and your colleagues at the commission to assist in ensuring that other people have exposure to this industry, exposure to this asset class, as Kishel would say,
Yeah.
and that they become more versed in it so that we as a jurisdiction in total can move forward. Adriana, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Very lowly,
Lowly.
very softly.
Let me put
Okay.
in my other headphones.
That's better.
Okay, great. On behalf of Elise, I would like to thank our featured regulatory expert speakers, Mrs. Kishel Blaze Cameron, Deputy Director of Specialized Supervision at BVI Financial Services Commission, and Ms. Ayana Hull, the Head of Private Wealth and Regulatory at Harney's, as well as our expert moderator, Elise Donovan, CEO of BVI Finance. We've all thoroughly enjoyed this breakfast forum that is part 2 of the positioning the BVI as a global hub for virtual assets. During this session, again, we gained valuable insight into the application process of VASP and reviewed the regulated structure of the BVI that has attracted business to this jurisdiction, in addition to discussing emerging trends and risks within the virtual assets landscape. Should anyone have any additional questions, please send them to info@bvifinance.vg, and perhaps that would lead to a part 3. For additional information on virtual assets and other BVI Finance updates, persons can visit our website, bvifinance.vg. I would also like to encourage everyone to follow us on socials, such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, formerly Twitter, known as X, at BVI Finance. And this session will also be available at a later time shortly, probably at the end of this week, to be viewed on our YouTube page, again, at BVI Finance. Again, thank you all for your time and participation in this morning's BVI Finance Breakfast Forum. I'm Adriana Salvaral, the Marketing and Media Relations Coordinator, and I'm signing out on behalf of our CEO, Ms. Elise Donovan. Again, be sure to join us again soon, and thank you for engaging with us this morning. Have a blessed day.